Alright guys, let's start. Does this need to... Okay. As usual, we'll begin with a song and then a prayer. So turn to 157. 157. Kelly and Monica lost power, so they're not able to come here tonight. So let's keep them in mind. Maybe if it prolongs, we'll send them a text or something, see if they need something. Okay, 157. Magnify, oh magnify our God and Father. Magnify, oh magnify our God. He has made us in His glorious image. We ever strive to be like Him. He alone is holy, He alone is right. Just cry aloud with gladness our joy in Him. Cry aloud with gladness our joy in Him. Magnify, oh magnify our God and Father. Magnify, oh magnify our God. He has given us His Son to save us, now reconciled to be like Him. Give Him praise forever, honor and revere Him. Cry aloud with gladness our joy in Him. Cry aloud with gladness our joy in Him. Magnify, oh magnify our God and Father. Magnify, oh magnify our God. He will bring us to His wondrous glory, to perfect fellowship with Him. We will see His wonder, we will see His beauty. Cry aloud with gladness our joy in Him. Cry aloud with gladness our joy in Him. Please bow with me. Lord, we thank You for Your word. Thank You for this time to come together and to learn more about You. Please be with us here. Please bless us. Please give us knowledge and wisdom that we can use that in our daily lives. Thank You for watching over us. Thank You for everything that You have given us. Lord, I pray that this study tonight would be beneficial and fruitful. Lord, please help us to be bold. Help us to bring others to You and to spread the good news about Your Son to those who have not heard. Lord, You are awesome and mighty. We serve a really gracious and loving Father. Thank You for all that You are. And it's through Christ whom I pray. Amen.
Alrighty. We haven't. Okay. If you need a printed lesson, Richard's got one, so just raise your hand if you'd like one of those. Are we having kids class tonight? Right now? Okay. Okay, cool. We'll hang out with the adults. That's great. If you want to open up your Bibles to Acts chapter 16, Acts 16 is where we're going to be starting our study tonight. we're continuing the study that we've had of living stones, looking at some of the accounts from our brethren, looking at really just kind of some different characters who we can learn good lessons from. We've, I think, primarily been looking at a lot of Old Testament characters. I know in maybe some of the recent weeks we've started to branch into some of the New Testament ones, and we're going to continue that tonight. Tonight we're going to be looking at the character of Timothy. So a couple of things about Timothy, and then we're going to kind of try to hone in on a couple of stories from Timothy's life that hopefully we can learn some good lessons from and take some good notes from. Before I dive into Timothy, I did want to mention as well, we have the weekend series coming up. I think most should be aware at this point, but Josh and Kirby are going to be here. It's good to see Kirby tonight. They're going to be here this weekend and are going to be teaching. There's going to be a singing and a potluck at our house tomorrow night, and then as well some studies here at the building on Saturday, and then Josh will be preaching for us on Sunday. So definitely looking forward to that. All right, so thinking about the character Timothy, before I kind of dive into some of the just overview of Timothy's life, I'm just curious what you guys know or what you've seen about Timothy in the past. What are some things that stand out about this character? And if you don't know, then there's some hints up here on the screen as well. But what are some things that we know about this character Timothy that we read about in the pages of the Scripture? Yeah, okay. So he was strongly influenced by his mother and grandmother. Paul specifically calls that out to Timothy when in one of the letters that he writes to them, saying, hey, you were taught these things by your mother and your grandmother, and it seems like they were believers of some sort as well, along with him, and were very influential in his early life. Yeah, that's great. Abby? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we'll get into a little bit of that conflict that may have existed within Timothy tonight when we talk about one of the stories from his early life. But yeah, like we mentioned, like I have up here on the screen, Timothy was a believer who had a Jewish mother, and it seems like his mother was a believer as well, and then a Greek father. So kind of to Abby's point, Timothy was able to kind of bridge this gap that existed between the Jews and the Gentiles in the early church, and maybe kind of understand both perspectives. It kind of has a unique role in that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I don't remember exactly where that's mentioned. I think I had it in my notes somewhere here. First Timothy. Yeah. So he sends him back to Ephesus. And if you remember in the book of Acts, Paul spends a good bit of time in Ephesus. Like, that wasn't just a place that he stopped over. That was a place that he spent a good amount of time, that he made a lot of efforts. That was, I think, multiple years of his third missionary journey spent there in Ephesus. So Timothy is entrusted with continuing on that work, and plays a really influential role in that church. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things I want to kind of key in on. One of the specific stories about Timothy's life tonight is exactly what Richard just talked about, that And it's kind of the only example I think that we see in, or at least it's called out in the pages of Scripture, where Paul, like you're saying, who understood that circumcision was not necessary for salvation, still made an emphasis to make sure that Timothy had checked that box, so that he wasn't impeding the spread of the gospel, which is right. Right. Yep. 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 Did I see another hand back here somewhere? Okay. So I mean, a couple of other things to emphasize about Timothy, and then, like I said, we'll dive in and look at some of the specific text. Timothy, kind of like we mentioned, joins Paul on his travels. Paul is passing through Lystra, and we'll read about this here in just a moment in Acts 16. But Paul's passing through Lystra, and he meets this guy named Timothy. Timothy joins him on his missionary journey, and then really from there, you see Timothy mentioned several times in the rest of the pages of the story of Acts. It seems like he's a part of most of the rest of Paul's second missionary journey, Paul's third missionary journey. Timothy is mentioned, I think, in 9 or 10 of the different epistles, multiple times even listed as like a co-author of some of the epistles that Paul sends to some of these churches. So it really becomes a pretty significant character in the story of the spread of the early church. Paul even refers to Timothy in the book of Philippians as his true son in the faith. So this was more than just like a little errand boy that Paul picks up in Lystra. This was someone that Paul saw as a coworker, someone that Paul saw that he had a really real and important relationship with, that he served as a mentor and a father in the faith to. It's someone that even receives several individual letters from Paul that we have recorded in the pages of Scripture as well. And then I think the note up here at the bottom is interesting as well, and I think some of the comments that are made kind of speak to this. Timothy, when he joined Paul's mission, was not joining like a really, we look back and we're like, oh yeah, that would have been so awesome to travel around with Paul, do all these cool things, be a part of the spread of the gospel in the early church. This was kind of a crazy journey that Paul was on. He was doing he was preaching a really radical message. One of the passages we're going to read tonight literally says Paul was turning the world upside down. That's what Timothy signs up to join. It's kind of this spreading of this kind of crazy gospel message. But what you see is that there is still a lot of stability that Timothy finds in the kingdom. He still finds a lot of faith and comfort in the work, even despite the kind of craziness that happens along the way with his journey with Paul. All right, so let's read a little bit in Acts chapter 16. The first couple of questions that I have here specifically come from this first story, the first time we're introduced to Timothy here in Acts chapter 16, and I really just want us to read the first 3 verses, and then we'll skip ahead a little bit in the story of Timothy to look at another story in Acts chapter 17, and then look at a little bit in 1 Thessalonians as well to think about a little bit later. If someone could read verses 1 through 3 of Acts chapter 16. All right. So, and I think we've maybe done this in a couple of the other classes as well, but I want us to really try to, in answering this question, try to put yourself in the shoes of Timothy. So, we've already kind of been introduced to this character a little bit, but think about, the context of what we just read. Timothy is a disciple in the town of Lystra. If you think about Lystra, this is a place that Paul had passed through on his first missionary journey. He actually went through there once and then came back through on his way out of town as well. Does anyone remember, just offhand, what happened to Paul in Lystra on his first missionary journey? He was stoned. Yeah. So we don't know exactly when Timothy became a believer, But I'm sure that the believers in Lystra would have always remembered that this Paul guy, when he came to town, was the one who got stoned for preaching the gospel. He also got up from that stoning and walked away, which would have been pretty incredible as well. But that would have been a very real reminder of the dangers that come with following the gospel to Timothy, being a disciple from Lystra. So he's a disciple in Lystra. He's described in verse 2 as being well spoken of by the believers. And it's not just the believers in Lystra, but also the believers in the neighboring town of Iconium. So I think you can gather from that even in Timothy's time just here in Lystra, he was going to other places, and he was helping the work even in neighboring towns. And Paul asks Timothy to accompany him on this journey. He asks him to go along with him. So again, try to put yourself in the shoes of Timothy, a young believer in a place where the church has just started, in recent years. We don't know exactly how old Timothy is here, but I think it's safe to assume he's at the oldest in his probably early 20s, likely maybe even in his teenage years still. What would you have done if this Paul guy comes to town and is again preaching the gospel, and he asks you to accompany him on his journey, to leave your hometown and to go along with Paul and to begin and to really continue the work of spreading the gospel? Would you have had the same response that Timothy had? Why would you? Why would you have not? And when I ask this question, I'm not necessarily saying that that saying yes to Paul is like the 100% right answer. It's okay because I think there legitimately are some reasons why Timothy could have stayed in Lystra, and that would not have been a wrong decision, because obviously not everyone at Lystra packed up their bags and went with Paul. So when you think about this question, would you have joined Paul, and what are maybe some reasons why you would or would not have if you were in Timothy's shoes? What do you guys think about that? Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of mentioned it already, but this was someone that it wasn't just like there was potential danger, like there was actual demonstrated danger in joining this mission. Like Paul was being threatened in every city that he was in. When he was in Lystra the time before, he had been stoned. Like this was not an uncommon thing at all. So yeah, I mean, I think I would definitely be kind of weighing the cost a little bit and saying, is this something that I want to be a part of? Jackie and Tim? Yeah. Yeah. That's a great perspective. Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for, I guess, adventure or doing something different in the pursuit of the kingdom, this is definitely the place to be. And Timothy definitely would have been joining in on a really, grand and awesome mission that. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's very possible. Yeah. Tim? Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think that is an interesting and important thing to note about Timothy is that him joining Paul was not just like uh, it wasn't out of character. Like this was something kind of to what Tim is speaking of. This is something that kind of already it makes sense with the other things that he's doing here. Like he's already involved in the work of the gospel. He's already going to neighboring towns. He's already seemingly trying to emulate Paul in some ways in the things that he's doing. So it makes sense that he would kind of take that to the next step and go along with Paul. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this will kind of go to the next part of this big story that we're going to look at here in a second. But I don't think if Timothy had the attitude of hypothetical Richard we're talking about here, I don't think he would have submitted to circumcision like he had. Like that would have been like a what? Like I'm not doing that. That's not necessary. Like so you definitely see. I think you see the right attitude, but I do think and I feel right along there with you. Like if this was me, I'm probably joining because this seems so cool. This seems so exciting and more for pride reasons, for sure. That's a good point. Any other observations here on maybe why you would or wouldn't have joined with Paul? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I feel like if I was in Timothy's shoes here and kind of go along with what Nate's saying, one of the things I would have been like is like, hey, isn't there a need here in Lystra? Like obviously Timothy was already doing something in the work there in Lystra and even some of the neighboring cities as well. Like, isn't there a need for the gospel to grow here in the city that I'm from? And yeah, this is already a really new and big and intimidating challenge. I don't want to tack on top of that the burden of going to a new place and going somewhere that's completely different, outside of my comfort zone, places that are more dangerous, where I don't have the connections and comfort that I would have here in Lystra. I think that would be a real, and I don't think that would be a bad reason either. Like again, like I said, not everyone in the city of Lystra leaves Lystra to go and on this journey with Paul. It really seems like it's just Timothy. And in a lot of the places he goes, Paul isn't asking everyone to pick up and leave and go somewhere else. There are many who stay behind, who do continue to do the work in these places. But Timothy is willing to go an extra step of taking a step into something that was somewhat inconvenient and something that was probably pretty uncomfortable for him. Not just in spreading the gospel, but in taking this to different places. Any other thoughts or observations here on this first question? All right, so like I mentioned, kind of staying here in Acts chapter 16 before we move on and look at one other story quickly in the life of Timothy as well. Like we've mentioned and kind of talked about a couple of times already, Timothy not only joins Paul on this journey, but he also submits to circumcision. So, like Richard mentioned, there was not and it had just been established really in the chapter before that circumcision is not necessary for salvation. Acts 15 talks about that. Paul was likely taking that letter from the council in Jerusalem along with him and telling the different churches along the way that this was the case. But because of the impact that it would have or could have had on the spread of the gospel, Paul, it seems like, somewhat insists on Timothy being circumcised. At least the way that my version reads is it says he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews that were there. I'm sure that Timothy had a say in the matter, but it seems like this was something that Paul wanted to happen and was pretty firm about. So again, I think we've already kind of talked about it a little bit, but what is this example of Timothy being willing to submit to something that was not even necessary for salvation, that was explicitly said in the book of Acts? What does that reveal to us about the faith and character of Timothy, Stephen? Yeah. Yeah, I love that about finding his identity and spreading the gospel. I mean, it would have been so easy for Timothy to even just find his identity in any of the things that we talked about here. Like, oh, my identity is that I'm following after Paul, or my identity is that I'm from Lystra, or my identity is that I have a Greek father, or a Jewish mother, whatever. But yeah, Timothy's sole focus and the humble perspective that he has here is that he's going to tie himself up and wrap himself up in the spreading of the gospel. And whatever it takes for him to be more effective in that, he's going to be willing to do, even if it was something that was not considered necessary. He was willing to take that extra step. It's a good observation. Anything else you guys see here? Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'd never thought about that until you said that just now, but not sure how. Maybe they just ask, like, when you come to the synagogue, you're like, you circumcised? Yeah, I guess, yeah. Hopefully, goodness. But yeah, this was not something that, and I think, like, Timothy could have made a very reasonable case back to Paul, saying, Paul, you know this isn't necessary. You know that these Jews that are requiring this are in the wrong. Why do I have to do this? And maybe they had that conversation. I mean, I'm sure that Paul at least wanted to have a bit of a discussion with Timothy, but that doesn't hold Timothy back from doing what Paul is requesting here. Definitely shows a lot of commitment for that, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it says there in verse 4, they're delivering for observance the decisions that have been reached by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem, which exactly had to do with circumcision not being necessary for salvation. So Timothy is going along and helping spread this message of, hey, you don't need to follow after the old law anymore, but he is still willing to do something and to inconvenience himself in a way that was so that there wouldn't be any type of inconvenience to the spread of the gospel. He's willing to put himself in inconvenience so that the gospel is not inconvenience, which is really powerful. Richard and then Greg. sure. Yeah. Yeah, him demonstrating that definitely makes him a good candidate to be joining Paul on this journey for sure. Greg? Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Jackie, do you have something? Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, I want us to spend a little bit of time looking at another story a little bit later in the pages of Timothy's life. Let's go over to Acts chapter 17, just one page over. So, I want us to read about Paul and Paul's interaction with the church in Thessalonica. This is going to be a little bit of a preview because we're actually going to be studying First and Second Thessalonians in a couple of months here in the adult class. So you can look forward to hearing about this again in a couple of weeks. But let's see. Let's just go ahead and read verses 1 through 15 of Acts chapter 17, just to kind of get a little bit of the context of some of the things that were happening as Timothy was on this journey with Paul. And then we're going to read in 1 Thessalonians about a specific mission that Paul gives Timothy when it comes to this Thessalonian church that we're reading about here. So if I get two people to read, I'll do one person to do 1 through 8, and then someone to do 9 through 15. 1 through 8, and 9 through 15. All right, Luke and Carlos. All right. So we see Paul and Silas continue on in their journey. They're interacting with these various places in Macedonia. In chapter 4, we actually read about Paul and Silas in Philippi, and that's the famous story of them being put in jail, and they sing, and there's the earthquake, and the jailer's converted. It doesn't say that Timothy is imprisoned alongside them in Philippi, but obviously he's seen the results again of what comes of serving the gospel um, here alongside Paul and Silas. When we come to Thessalonica, this is kind of an interesting story. Paul only interacts with this church, it seems like, for 3 or 4 weeks. It says he's only there for 3 Sabbath days before he's run out of town by the Jews. Him and Silas and Timothy are forced to basically flee the town at night, and they go on to Berea. In Berea, similar thing happens. It seems like the word is received a little bit better there, but the Jews from Thessalonica come again and they run him out of town in Berea, and then Paul is forced to flee to Athens. So look with me at 1 Thessalonians chapter 3. This is kind of where I want to key in on the specific mission that Timothy is given here in kind of the first part of his spreading the gospel alongside Paul. Paul is writing back to the church in Thessalonica, and he's basically recounting him sending Timothy back to this church after he had been forced to leave them so quickly. Read in 1 Thessalonians 3 with me, starting in verse 1. Paul says, "Therefore, when we could bear it no longer, we were willing to be left behind at Athens alone, and we sent Timothy, our brother and God's co-worker in the gospel of Christ, to establish and exhort you in your faith, that no one be moved by these afflictions. For you yourselves know that we were destined for this. For when we were with you, we kept telling you beforehand that we were to suffer affliction, just as has come to pass, and just as you know. For this reason, when I could bear it no longer, I sent to learn about your faith, for fear that somehow the tempter had tempted you, and our labor would be in vain." So when you think about this mission that Timothy is sent on here, Timothy, it says, is sent back to the church in Thessalonica, this place that Paul and Silas and Timothy had only been for 3 to 4 weeks, and that they hadn't just gotten run out of Thessalonica by the Jews in Thessalonica. Those Jews had actually gone on to the next city and weren't just content with getting Paul out of their city. They had to get Paul out of the next city as well. Paul sends Timothy back to that place where he had just been run out of town by the Jews twice in order to comfort and strengthen and exhort. It says establish and exhort in the faith, this group of believers. We don't know if Timothy had others with him, but it only says here that Timothy went to check on this church and to establish and exhort them. So imagine you're Timothy. What would be challenging about this mission that you're sent on by Paul? And maybe what would be your plan to accomplish this task? Where would be some places that you would turn for strength or for comfort? You've just joined Paul on this missionary journey to go about spreading the gospel. You've seen all of the danger and persecution that Paul is facing. You even experienced it in the same place that he's sending you back to. What would if you were in Timothy's shoes again? What would be challenging about this mission? And where would you turn for comfort if you were tasked with this kind of thing from the Apostle Paul? I think if I was Timothy, I might have kind of made that face that he's making right there, and been kind of like, "Ooh, Paul, not so sure about what you're sending me to do here. Like, could I just go back to Berea? Like, at least they were a little bit more noble there." But he goes all the way back to Thessalonica. What would be challenging if you were in Timothy's shoes about the mission that he's given here? Yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, that's why Paul is sending him, is because Paul doesn't know. Paul says, "I fear that the tempter had tempted you and our labor was in vain." And they didn't have, text messages or anything like that to be able to check in. Like, they were completely in the dark about what had happened to this group of believers. And Timothy heads back into that to establish and exhort them, it says here. Yeah. Yeah. yeah, if you maybe even have that fear yourself and have that doubt yourself or whatever, how are you going to accomplish the mission that is given of establishing and exhorting this group of believers? I think it was interesting in Acts 17 when you read about the persecution that these believers were undergoing. It says that they dragged one of the members of the church to the tribunal. This was not just like a knock on the door and we're serving a warrant for your arrest. This was like a really hard place to be a Christian. And Timothy heads back to that place, not just to like show up and kind of check in and leave, but to establish and exhort this group, and doing that as a young Christian. Yeah, David. I think we can assume, yeah. 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 Oh yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, I think Timothy, if I think about where he would have had to turn for strength, it's definitely to spiritual things because all the physical things that he could have turned to for comfort likely, are not going to be available to him. Like he's by himself, he's in a place that's dangerous, he's not in a comfortable situation. So he's going to have to turn to God for strength and comfort. And that'd be tough. Yeah. Oh, you can go ahead, Jackie. Yeah. What would I do? Well, hopefully, yeah. The letter that Paul sends back to the Thessalonians tells them to pray without ceasing. So, and rejoice always. So, I would probably try to do those things. Yeah. Richard.
Well, I was just going to say, following up
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to have a perspective that goes beyond just what you can see and feel, because this is not the decision that you make if you're just making like the logical decision. Like, you don't go back to the place that you just got run out of town. You don't go back by yourself. You don't probably want to go if you're the youngest, most inexperienced person at this party. Like if I'm Timothy, I'm like, yo, why aren't we sending Silas? Like Silas is older and more experienced, like wiser. He's been in prison already. Like he's got experience with that. Like let's send Silas. But Timothy's the one that goes. And you see that Timothy demonstrates his character in this because this isn't the last time that Paul sends Timothy somewhere to do something like this. It kind of seems like anytime that Paul is concerned about a church, Timothy's one of the people that Paul is tapping to say, hey, I need you to go check on this group. I need you to go be with this group of people and establish and exhort them. It's kind of the mission that he gives him in the letters that he writes to them as well. So, and I think to the points we're making, that's accomplished through reliance on God, not on the physical things. Yeah, David? Yeah. 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 really is. These people are good examples for us. We may not be tasked with the same exact mission, but whenever we're given a mission to go and to establish, to exhort people, to encourage, to spread the gospel, I think we should be trying to pull from the examples of these people that we read about in the scriptures and try to emulate their actions in some ways. All right, a couple of takeaways for us, and then we'll wrap up for the night. This is mostly from the first couple of questions that we covered, but when I think about Timothy, I think about someone who put the kingdom first, even when it was inconvenient, even when it was uncomfortable. Timothy was willing to leave his home. He was willing to leave things that were comfortable. He wasn't willing just to leave, but he was also willing to do something that was inconvenient and uncomfortable, and could have argued was not even necessary. It made me think of Luke chapter 14, verse 26, where it says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Timothy was obviously not asked to literally hate his mother, and that's not what Jesus is literally asking the believers here in Luke 14 to do. But he was asked to prioritize something higher than his family that he left behind in Lystra. He was asked to prioritize something higher than his comfort, something higher than what he probably wanted to do in accomplishing this mission of spreading the gospel. And I think to some of the points we made earlier, that was because Timothy had this mindset of doing whatever it took to spread the gospel. The kingdom came first, no matter what. And secondly, and this is mostly from the mission that we just talked about, to go back to the Thessalonian church, I think we see in Timothy a willingness to challenge himself. Timothy was young. He was inexperienced. He was still very early on in his faith, even when he joins Paul and when he goes about this mission to help the Thessalonian church. But I think he lives out the command that Paul gives him in 1 Timothy 4 and verse 12, where he says, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, conduct, and love, and faith, and purity." I think a lot of the way that Timothy would have been able to accomplish the mission that Paul set was just by the way that he lived his life, by the things that he was doing, by his conduct. He was able to accomplish that great mission that Paul set in front of him that would have been challenging. And I think in the same way, whether we are young or whether we're old but don't feel very experienced in our faith, we should be willing to push ourselves and be willing to challenge ourselves to do more, like Timothy does here. I think the way that we do that is by a lot of the things we talked about, by trusting in God and relying on Him, even when we are outside of our comfort zone, even when we're going beyond what we feel is comfortable, being willing to do that for the sake of the spread of the gospel. That's about all the time we have for tonight. Any last observations on Timothy that anyone has burning within them they want to share? Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, Jesus when he calls the disciples, a lot of them left their families to go and follow after Jesus. So I don't think that would have excluded Timothy, maybe, but Paul does say later in his epistles that those are considerations. That when you have a family, when you have other people to take care of, that is something that you have to think about as well. So yeah, that would have been different for sure. Any other thoughts or observations on Timothy? All right, let's wrap up with a word of prayer, and we'll get out of here. God, thank you so much for the example that we have of these believers like Timothy, who mantle of spreading the gospel, who are willing to make sacrifices, who are willing to do things that were uncomfortable or inconvenient, all in the pursuit of spreading your gospel. And not for any earthly renown, not for any prideful reason, but just doing so humbly because they realized that they were vessels of yours that could take this great message and spread it to those who needed to hear it. I pray that in all of these examples that we're looking at in the scriptures of these living stones, these pillars of faith. I pray that you will help us to emulate these people in the ways that we should and to not make the same mistakes that some of them made in other ways. Help us to take these lessons to heart, to be changed, and that by looking at their examples, that we will be able to become ultimately more like you, Father. Not more like any man, but just more like you. Please be with us all tonight as we go home. Keep us safe. Be with those who can't be here tonight, whether it is because of sickness or because of the storm that's happening. Just keep them safe. And pray that you'll continue to be with Blake and Liz and Oakley. Help them as they are beginning to be a family together. And I just pray that Oakley will be able to go home from the hospital soon. Be with the series of studies that we have ahead of us this weekend, Father. We're grateful that Josh and Kirby are here, and I pray that the things that we study in your word will be beneficial to our group, and that many will be encouraged by it and built up, and we will all be able to grow closer to you because of it. Father, thank you so much for this time we've had to be together, and I pray this all in Jesus' name.